document. And so obviously we'll incorporate the Neshoba Tech budget, but I've made a general allowance, and I think we've got room for whatever the final number comes in at, which shouldn't vary significantly. And then obviously the other big unknown, aside from the really extraordinary economic conditions that we're in right now, for the first time in 40 years, we're in a period of high inflation. You may have seen the data that came out today that in January, inflation was up 7.5% over a year ago. And we're still obviously dealing with the impacts of the pandemic. And again, for a budget that's going to begin in almost 5 months from now and go almost 17 months from now. So it's, there's some uncertainty, as there always is when we prepare this document. And then the other big part from the local piece is we don't have labor agreements yet for the upcoming fiscal year. And so we've held back money in reserve on the town side, because unlike the school department, the general government, we have to bring those agreements to town meeting once they're settled, and to seek funding and ratification. And also the town's bylaws prohibit the pre-funding of budgets in anticipation of agreements. So with that, I think, again, we're as poised as we can be given the fiscal realities of today. So moving into the budget, on slide 3, it's $149.5 million when all settles in, we anticipate, which is about a 3.5% increase over the current year. And the big pieces of that, as we know, are the school department, which is our biggest line in terms of allocation of funds, which is $67.5 million, or an increase of $2.5 million, or 3.85% over the current year. And again, we know the school department doesn't cover their benefit costs and the town support costs like facilities, but this is sort of their budget line item that's under the control of the school committee. And we have seen the release, as I've sent to you, the superintendent's draft budget. I know the school committee's public hearing, I believe, is March 1st. So that's coming up in a few weeks, in which they'll walk through the budget page by page, line by line. And again, I think the superintendent's summary, sort of indicates, the impacts in their budget, many of which we discussed back in December, and you'll see in the little detail later in this report. On the general government side, we have, roughly a 2-to-1 ratio. You can see we're $33.5 million, which is roughly half of the amount that we provide to the school department line. And that's an increase of $1.5 million, or about 4.5%. Again, my number for Neshoba Tech is an increase of $100,000 to 3.825. Again, we'll know that number tomorrow. I've not seen a preview or advanced draft of that, so I don't know where it all lands in once everything settles down with enrollments and minimum contributions and so forth, as determined by the state's formula. And then our benefits and insurance is obviously a major component of the town side. That's $28.5 million going forward, another $1.6 million increase, or 5.8%. And then part of the reason we're able to offset some of this is our debt service continues to decrease. It's down to $11.3 million out of the $150 million budget for the upcoming year, which is a decrease of $1.4 million, or almost 11%. And again, we'll touch upon that a little later in terms of what's excluded debt and non-excluded debt, but but both are declining in this budget. I think the philosophy continues to main forward, as you see on slide 4, which is that it's really a maintenance budget. We're crossing a fiscal year, but really there's no change in focus or philosophy or direction on the town side. We're maintaining services. There's really no significant increase in general government positions. And we're maintaining our capital budget, which John will go into detail later, at $3.77 million. And so given that focus, the priorities remain the same. Education being the foremost priority, and as I noted earlier, the biggest allocation of the town's funds. And then obviously, public safety, which includes police, fire, and also public works, which is part of that safety component. And then again, maintaining our capital infrastructure and health and human services. If you go to slide 5.
Oh, I'm going to jump in for a second.
Sorry, slide.
I'm sorry. What's going on in the background? We're not currently live. We dropped off of the broadcast for some reason. We are currently recording.
Okay.
I'll transfer the recording file to Chelmsford Telemedia from my computer once it's finished. Apparently, it's an issue going on right now. I'm the only one recording, but at least we have a recording going. So I just want to let everybody know it has been recorded locally here. I will transfer the file after. Pam, hopefully it works well for your note-taking purposes. But I don't know what it will look like. It'll likely look like all of us appearing currently as we are now on our screen for the recording, based upon recordings I've done in the past. So just an FYI for everyone that's currently watching. This is a recording. We've not gone live. And if I do go back live, I'll let everyone know.
Okay, if you can go advance to slide 6, we'll the next slide. Thank you. Just an overview of the line item changes in terms of what is changing in terms of dollar amounts. And as you can see, I highlight sort of the big numbers. Obviously the schools I mentioned earlier, $2.5 million. Public safety over $500,000. Public works about $275,000. Community services $200,000. And benefits, as I mentioned earlier, $1.57 million. And then I mentioned just a moment ago our decline in debt service. And not to be overlooked, we did have an increase in our state assessments for the year, and we'll touch upon that a little bit later, of over $250,000. So again, that brings you to roughly the $4.5 million increase. On the revenue side, with the next slide, again, it's roughly $149.5 million. You can see the property tax, if going to assuming full levy, would be $5.7 million. State aid is just under $1 million. Local receipts just over $400,000. And our available funds, that's basically your free cash that we put the $1 million into the budget, if you may recall, to address the tax levy this year. So that's why that's down over $1 million. And then there's some miscellaneous charges in there regarding benefits for revolving funds. But basically, it's that's how it works out. I like to do on the next slide. I like to annually look at a 5 and 10 year snapshot to sort of see if there's trends over time, and also just give insight for people, unlike the finance committee or select board who aren't looking at this annually or as closely, just to give you a sense of what changes over time and where is the town's money going over time, and again why the taxes go up over time. And as you can see, the biggest ones are highlighted. Chelmsford schools over the last 5 years would go up over $10 million, or roughly 18%. Neshoba Tech goes up $1 million, a third. Again, that's based on enrollment. Public safety, $2.5 million. Benefits and insurance, as I mentioned earlier, that's going up 25% in 5 years, or over $5.5 million. And as I mentioned at the outset, our debt service is declining by over 20% in 5 years, or over $3 million. The next slide looks at it for a 10-year horizon. And again, you see many of the same trends. The schools are up over, almost $20 million over a 10-year period. Again, that roughly about $2 million or so over a 10-year period annually. Public safety up over $4 million. Neshoba Tech, just a little bit before that, you can see that's up significantly based upon enrollment driven. We are the largest member of Neshoba Tech, and we'll touch upon the enrollment numbers a little later. And again, benefits and insurance, you're roughly going up, you can see $1 million a year, or almost 59% over a 10-year period. And as I mentioned, repeatedly, our debt service has declined, in the last decade. And again, these are nominal dollars, not real dollars. So you can obviously see, how things are trending. So again, now moving into the schools, which again is our largest line item, I'm proposing a $2.5 million increase, or 3.85% to $67.5 million. The next slide again shows you a 10-year history of the increases, and you can see the 3.85 is roughly where we've been, over the last decade. You had the anomaly between 21 and 22 with the pandemic, where we sort of made that 1 year adjustment again, sort of pausing at the pandemic with the uncertainties, and then sort of adjusting last year. But you can see the budgetary increase has been roughly 3.5% or so over the last decade. And again, a lot of that is, from the superintendent's budget and the points I'll make later, a lot of that is just fixed costs. I mean, it's a labor organization, educators. And so obviously you've got the cost increases in terms of salaries, which is what we do. And then their fixed costs, like their contractual obligations like transportation, special education costs, and so forth. So again, it's sort of in keeping with where we've been, and obviously probably likely where we're going. And towards that end, and one I'll pause. If you go to the next slide, slide 12 goes to the Chapter 70 of the Chapter 70 funding, and you can see this year is a bit of an anomaly. We've been a minimum funding community at roughly $30 per student, for the last several years. And this year it jumped to 614,000, which, we roughly have 5,000 students. So you can see it's not 50, it's not $30 a student. It's almost 4 times that amount, or over 600,000, and it's an increase of 5%. And this one caught us off guard when the governor's budget came out. And so what I did is I put a call into the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is the oversight board for the Chapter 70 formula, as well as the minimum contribution for schools and so forth. And I said to him, I said, look, I'm presenting this budget to the select board and finance committee. They're going to ask what happened. And I said, I'd like to understand it, because when I peer into the pages, they give you these sheets and of your foundation aid, your minimum aid, your, contributions and so forth, and sectors. I said, help me out a little, because I said, I've been doing this for 15 years in Chelmsford. I've been doing it for 32 years in general. I said, what is it that's changed? And the short story is, this is an anomaly. Our status hasn't changed as a community. What has happened here is the state, in its Chapter 70 formula, adjusted the formula for low-income students. They made the threshold change to 185% of the federal poverty level. And so what's happened is, in Chelmsford, we had an increase of qualifying students by 200, and that drove the change. And so it drove our minimum contribution up by almost $3 million, which again is not an issue in Chelmsford. We're well above minimum by over 30 million, but it also drove the Chapter 70 aid. Because every year there are adjustments for inflation, there are adjustments for enrollment increases, but that's the story. And I basically then said, okay, well, now what will happen next year? I said, because we look at budgeting in a multi-year formula, perspective and so forth. And he's and talked to the folks at DESE, he basically said, no, he said, you'll go back to normal next year. He said, what's happened is with the phase in of the education foundation adjustments to the law over that 7-year period in which we're entering into year 3, this was an adjustment. And he said, if I'm sitting in Chelmsford shoes for next year, don't look for another 600,000. You're probably back to whatever the minimum is going to be, barring the understanding is you're going to have a new governor next year, and who knows what the governor may fund as a minimum next year. But so anyway, I wanted to explain that because it does jump out at you, and if you look, and when you start diving into the DESE pages on their website, we're in what they call low income group 4, which is a percentage of low income students. Ours is 20.66%. And the range is, just to give you a sense, that range is 18 to 24%, but the state has 12 groupings that go from group 1 of 0 to 6% to group 12 of 80%. So that's sort of the highlighted, change for this year. And so again, barring the unforeseen, that categorization and, is now baked in, so you won't see that adjustment for next year's budget. So thank you for the indulgence on that, because I know it's a question that it will come up, and I know it's a question that caught me off guard. So moving forward to that, on the next slide, you can see, as you have post there, as I mentioned earlier, we're well above foundation budget by over $20 million this year, or almost 37%. And you can see, going back to when I started in 2007, we were relatively close to the net school spending requirements. And you can see that, and you can see the difference is that 56 to this year is 59 is over 3 million. Whereas if you look between 21 and 22, it was just over 1 million. So again, the adjustments been made with our Chapter 70. Fortunately, it doesn't affect us in terms of minimum net school spending requirements, since we're well above that threshold. Other item I noted, and I did this back in December, is per pupil expenditure. Again, the 21 data has not been released by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, But our expectation is right now we're spending over $16,000 per student in the Chelmsford Public Schools. If you then jump on to slide 16, you can go to the next one. I don't want to go through everything because you read that. But as you know, when we talked about this in December, we like to look at how we are to the group of schools that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education uses our comparable communities, and they make these assessments annually. And by and large, there's a couple of movement of the communities, but they generally are static over time. And also, I also add data for our comparable communities. And so I think the best way to look at this chart is if you go to the next one on the chart form, you can see that Chelmsford's roughly in the middle. We're right below Westford, and right above Arlington. And so you can see, we're never going to be the Burlington level, which is extraordinary given their commercial base. And we're obviously the other end of the extreme is Drake. So again, we see that Chelmsford tends to like to always be the midpoint as its sweet spot. So that's where we are with the most recent data. And then similarly, I look at enrollment and student teacher ratio. And again, you see over time, some interesting thing to note with this chart is you can see our enrollment didn't fully bounce back from the first year of the pandemic where parents took their kids out of school either for homeschooling or to private schools. But obviously it is up. And we won't have the data on teachers and student teacher ratio till the end of the school year when they file their end of year reports. But you can see what's happening over time is our student teacher ratio is declining. Our enrollment is really declining over time. And related to that, if you do see the school committee meeting about a month ago, they do have a enrollment projection over the upcoming decade. And it looks like it's leveling off, if not slightly increasing. But again, barring the unforeseen, nothing too dramatic. You're starting to see now an increase at the elementary grades, and you sort of have your high school grades are at a lower level at this point in time. And then similarly, you see the comparable data with the same group of comparable communities. And the next slide again shows it in a chart form. And you can see our student teacher ratio. Once again, Chelmsford is right there, slap in the middle, with Burlington having the best over on the left-hand side in this column, and, Bridgewater, Raynham on the right-hand side. So again, Chelmsford, sort of, and if many of you follow this over the years, we've kind of been at that location. And next, another metric is average class size. Again, similar to what you would see with the declining enrollment and the slight increase in teachers, that's declined over time. And again, advancing 2 slides, you see that we tend to fare, so it's probably a little above of averages, left being, again, Burlington and Chelmsford being 4th out of that chart. So again, we're really, meeting the educational needs of the community in that area. And then the next slide just sort of shows you the cost drivers in the school budget. And again, they're really drawn out in the superintendent's budget. But when we're preparing our budget sort of simultaneously and sort of almost have the same release date, I released mine on the 27th and he released his on February 1st. Again, it's all based on personnel, your COLA and step increases, the lane changes for educators and their retirement incentives. And then, as I mentioned at the outset, your transportation costs and special education costs, and then incidental things like utilities and contracted cleaning. Shifting to Neshoba Tech, again,
Paul,
yes.
sorry, you've been on such a roll, I didn't want to interrupt, but I've got
no, please do. I want you to ask questions, and John and I can help answer them.
Sure. Just on the slide that's up right there to start with.
Yeah.
So Dr. Lang's memo noted at least 7.5 new FTEs being added.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are those part of that 1.5 million for COLA? Where are those counted at as far as headcount increases?
That would be in his budget. Now, again, I'm at a macro level.
Okay.
Sort of looking at, so that would be in his budget because he did bring on some counselors for mental health needs for the students, which are a bulk of his new hires. And then he had a language program in the middle schools. But yeah, no, I don't have that. Those would be a separate number, but that may bridge the gap between my 2.5 million and what I'm showing here, 2.2 million.
Okay.
That's probably how he's able to absorb that.
Okay. And then on a previous slide that you don't have to go back to, Jim, but
sure.
The one that showed the net school spending,
Mm-hmm.
I looked 2022, it had 76 or 77 million. I think it was slide 18 if you're going back. I'm just trying to reconcile a bit. I think it was slide 18.
I think it was 13. I think it was
No,
13.
it wasn't. Sorry,
13.
that one. So
Yeah.
is that again? I know that's 22 versus 23, but the
Mhm.
22 school budget was 65 million.
Yeah.
So is that 77 million for the net school spending? Is that basically the all-in cost if you factored in benefits, facilities, all the things that aren't in the school budget? Is that how we get to the 77?
Exactly. And how that's done is the town accountant signs off on the net school spending with the school business manager. So basically, they take the input from the town accountant and bake in the cost for debt service, facilities, benefits being the main one. And then that becomes a net cost for what it costs to educate students. So yes, that's exactly it. So even though we've got a line item of 63 or 60, in the case of 22, 60, 63 million, it really is, the real cost is 77 million roughly. So again, that's why we always talk about, well, what percentage of the town's budget is schools? It's over half, and so that's exactly what it is.
Okay, thank you.
So again, if jumping back to slide 25, the Neshoba Tech, again, we'll know the number tomorrow morning when it's released. But again, as you can see on 26, it's really driven by enrollment. In this case, we sort of fared favorably that our enrollment in Neshoba Tech decreased by 5 students, and and the district's total enrollment increased by 20 students. So they now have almost over 687 students there. So Chelmsford's share goes from 31.78% down to 30%. So that affects our assessment. It also affects our portion of the debt service and other costs. Now, the other thing that's going to impact, and again, I don't know the number because I won't see it till tomorrow, is net school spending. Because remember, enrollment drives net school spending. So here we have a case where our enrollment at Neshoba Tech decreases and the enrollment at the Chelmsford Public Schools increases. So what we would expect is our Chapter 70 required funding, would increase in Chelmsford but decrease at Neshoba Tech. So therefore, as I'm sitting here tonight saying, well, gee, is that 104,000 a conservative number or I don't know, and I don't want to hazard a guess, but I would not be surprised if it came in lower than that number. So we'll just have to wait and see, because it's not just Chelmsford net school spending; it's also the net school spending of the other communities that are in Neshoba Tech that makes it such a complex formula. But anyway, we'll know tomorrow, and we'll report to you tomorrow with the presentation when that comes out. But anyway, at this point, I'm using roughly $100,000 increase at Neshoba Tech. And on slide 28, you can see the enrollment there. As you can see, it's you can see how it's. Oh, yeah, I'm just trying to follow your slide. Yeah, you can see the enrollment. Came up over the last decade when they completed their school renovation project, and now we're at the 200 student level in the district. So when you then move on to the per pupil expenditures at the schools, to the next slide, you can see that, again, we don't have the 21 data, and now we're in 22, but I think it's reasonable to assume that the expenditures, even though they declined in 20 relative to 19, I would think we're probably up around 22,000 in current fiscal year. Just looking at the trends over a year, we are running roughly about 1,000 per year. Again, their budget drivers on the next slide are similar to the Chelmsford Public Schools, and these were appointed. Yes, Jim.
Just to let you know, we're back live now. So
okay,
for people that are watching at home, it appears we're back live. We have been reporting to the best of our ability the first portion of this meeting, and Chelmsford Telemedia will look to post that as soon as possible once we get the file over to them. But just to let you know, it appears we are back live giving the presentation.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, their budget drivers are similar to the Chelmsford Public Schools. Again, they're an education service, so it's all personnel and labor costs. Teachers in the classroom. So you've got the contractual increases, their lane changes of those personnel. again, as a full funding district, as a separate government entity, they have the increase to the retirement system directly, as opposed to it showing on our net school spending as an indirect cost. They bear that, and we member communities fund those costs for Middlesex County, their benefits and so forth. And so again, they've got increases in their special education costs, their transportation, health insurance, and other contractual services to provide a technical education. And again, we'll see that detail tomorrow, and I'll provide it to you after the 10 o'clock virtual meeting. Moving over into public safety, we're maintaining staffing at the public safety levels with 69 full-time police, which includes 54 sworn officers. The next slide shows the call volume. It's, it ebbs and flows. You can see the last few years, we've been around 36,000 or so calls per year. Moving on to the fire department, we've got 63 and a half full-time employees, which includes 52 line firefighters, the chief, the deputy, and the 7 captains. And you can see the fire calls, have varied over the years. On slide 33, we were under 6,000, and which is rather low when you look historically over the last, half dozen or so years. But yeah, I think that's really probably an impact of the pandemic, where there's a couple things going on. One is people are nervous about going to the emergency room, even by ambulance, sadly. And the other part is if you have less, you may have less incidents in the community because there's less people out and less traffic and so forth. So their call volume was down. Then moving over into general trends, the employee compensation, which is again our biggest cost on the general government side, when all is said and done, meaning all the contracts are funded, it'll be over $1 million. Again, we only fund the non-union employee compensation, which again, based on the compensation schedule adjustment this year is 2%. The next big one on slide 35 is our health insurance. We haven't received our actual premium yet. We're expecting it within the next week, but the range was from 0 to 7.5%, and the average being basically the midpoint of that at 3.7%. We've used an estimate of 5%, and the reason for that is Chelmsford tends to skew higher than average because one is we're a larger community and we tend to have a bit of a little bit older employee population. So that's where we're at. And again, the number fluctuates even with precision because you have employees moving in and out based upon qualifying events, retirements, and so forth. So, and even the number of retirees varies over time. So we have a budgetary increase of $839,000. And I'm going to ask John to sort of just take a moment now, just sort of show you the history of what's gone on with our subscribers on this chart.
Sure.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Town Manager Cohen. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Finance Committee. As you look at this chart, I draw your attention down to the table area below with the numbers. I think that's a little easy to read. And this just kind of gives you a snapshot over the past, gives you about 12 years of history. And if you look at the first line, it has our active employees. And when you look back from where we are today at around 658, it was 606 back then. Below that are the number of retirees. It's currently around 947. And then if you look back, back in 2010, it was 776. The key thing here, if you look at this, is we've gained retirees at a rate, retiree subscribers, I should say, at a rate that's about, it's about 20, just over 20%. That's about double the percentage increase that we've seen over active employees. And the reason for that is not just, unique to Chelmsford, but we look around society, everyone knows where, life expectancies have increased significantly over the last few decades. And so you can see we're gaining retiree subscribers at a faster rate than what you would see because you're gaining new retirees, and then you're also you have to fill many of those positions with an active employee. So that's kind of the trends that we're seeing. We're fortunate that we have a retiree. Most retirees are on Medicare, and Medicare supplement plans are less expensive to the town. So even though we have a larger pool of retirees, the Medicare supplement plans are less expensive than what you would see in the HMO type plan. So just kind of show you the trend there.
And you can see on the slide that's on the screen now is really what it costs. You know, if most employees are enrolled in an HMO family plan as opposed to an indemnity plan. And right now that premium is for the current fiscal year is over $26,500. The town pays 75% of that, or just under $20,000. So if you factor in a figure of 5% for the next year, it's going to be over $20,000, almost $21,000 for the upcoming year. The other big one, moving on into Middlesex County retirement, is our assessment is known for fiscal 23. It's $10.5 million. This is an increase of $655,000 or 6.62%. Middlesex County does an actuarial every 2 years. And so we're in the second year of the last actuarial that was based upon December 31st, 2020, which obviously, if you think for a moment, there's going to be a new one done this summer based on, based on the 2 years we've just completed for 19, based on 21. So we'll report those results when we have them. And obviously the market was very strong over the 2 year period. So it'll be interesting to see how our numbers go forward. Although also the other change is going to be the actuarial assumptions that, and also the discount rate and in terms of return on investment. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to John Souza, who's the town's representative to the Middlesex County Retirement Board, and he can sort of explain what's happening here with Middlesex.
Sure, thank you, Paul. So if you look at this chart, I know many of you have seen this before. This shows it sort of breaks up our Middlesex retirement assessment in the different columns. The normal cost is the actual cost of providing a pension to all of the retirees for town and school that qualify into this system. And then you see, if you skip a column, that the next column is the ERI, is the early retirement incentive. The town finished paying for that back in 2019. We don't no longer have that. But the column that jumps out at you is the payment on the unfunded liability. So you can see that's more than doubled. So if you go back to 2012 levels and then where we are today. And part of the reason for that is we're getting closer and closer to paying off, our unfunded liability right now. It's scheduled to be fully funded in 2037. That's an increase of 2 years. During the last valuation, Middlesex pushed it out 2 years after discussing it with the members and with PARAC. One of the trends that's been a long time thing is Middlesex is been working to lower the assumed rate of return to try to make it more conservative. So on the valuation that they're using to calculate the 22 and 23 assessments, the assumed rate of return was lowered about 20 basis points to 7.3%. The last meeting that I attended, most likely when the new valuation that the town manager discussed, it's done this summer, most likely the Middlesex, after talking with the actuarial consultants, will most likely lower the assumed rate of return to around the 7% area, just to make it more conservative and based on investment trends that you're seeing in the market. The other thing that I would mention is, we all know that last year was just an absolute blowout year for performance in many of the equity markets, but that changes. This year, it's been a little rough sailing. So one of the things they employ is they do a smoothing formula. So the gains that were earned, for example, last year, those are recognized over a 5-year period, and that helps smooth it so that you don't have volatility in the assessment. So it'll definitely be a challenge going forward. One of the things for every town will be working to pay off this unfunded liability. But at least with when we see the new actuarial analysis, the assumed rate of return will be lower, and I think it'll make it more of a conservative look at it. So going forward, what we've been told in the past, when I receive any updates this spring or summer, I'll let everyone know. But what we've been told in the past is we should expect to see about 6.5% annual increases for the foreseeable future on our retirement assessment. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's not likely to change even with the strong market, because right now we're funded just around 50% of our unfunded actuarial liability, and we only have 14 years to go. And so there's a big a road ahead of us. So again, we'll report it as it moves along. Moving on to some other incidental costs, snow and ice. again, I reported this back in December, and again, it's worth reiterating. Road salt increased by almost a third to over $60 per ton. So I bumped up that budget by $100,000. And then we're all familiar with the shortage of contractors and the increased amount that we're paying premium for drivers, which is just unforeseen and unprecedented. So I bumped that up by $50,000. So the increase now, is a total of $150,000. As you know, it's a wild card. I mean, we're hoping to make it through the next 6 weeks or so this winter and come within or near budget. But it's the best that we can do, looking at where we've been and where we're going, to have a budget that's somewhat realistic for snow and ice. Next one is solid waste and recycling. That is a known contract because we're in the latter years of our contract. Our collection costs, which are basically the trucking costs and hauling, are up by over 4%, 84,000. And then the other part is our tonnage at the incinerator in Haverhill. That contractual obligation goes up by $3.60 a ton to $93.60. And so those costs are going up by $41,000 to 2.71% or $1.58 million. So I've got $125,000 budgeted for solid waste and recycling collection and disposal. Other tangential costs in terms of the $149.5 million budget is elections. Again, this is an election year. It's the state primary will be in September, right after Labor Day. The general state election in November, and the town election in April. So that's an additional $53,000 above the cost for this year, which was only one election, which was the town meeting election and town election in April. The other item of significance moving on is property casualty and workers' comp insurance. Again, we're sort of hitting on two fronts in this. One is replacement costs of buildings has risen significantly in terms of the market for construction, as well as the tight market for property reinsurance for stop loss and major costs for property damage, as well as the liabilities for law enforcement and public officials. And then on the workers' comp side, even though the workers' comp rates are decreasing, it's based on your payroll. And we just finished an audit of our payroll, and our payroll goes up about 4% per year, as you saw with the charts for personnel, because you've got not only the cost of living adjustment of 2% or so, but you've also got the steps and lanes and other changes. So in total, that gives us about a $50,000 increase in the insurance line, or about 5%. Similarly, Medicare tax is based on our payroll. So we're anticipating $1,125,000 payroll taxes for the upcoming fiscal year, or an increase of, again, roughly 4.5% or $49,000. Now, moving to a little bit of good news is on debt service. Again, we last did our issuance about in September. The credit rating was very positive and very favorable to the town. And they noted in terms of debt service, our debt is scheduled to be amortized by 94% within the next 10 years. And that's good news. It's declining. And again, it's really for the absence of any major building project. And if something like the school costs were to come into the equation, that would just blow this out of the water. But at this point, we're where we are. We paid off our debt for the projects that were from a generation ago, the police station, the library, the center school. So right now we're just really paying off the last phases of the sewer project and some incidental costs like the DPW building and fire station and so forth. So as well as the annual debt, capital budgets. So moving on to the next slide, our excluded debt service, as you can see, it's now just at $2 million. Again, result of the last phases of the sewer debt. And this is the decrease of about a third. However, as you know, excluded debt doesn't give you any relief in your operating budget, because it's really a surcharge in the property tax that's tied to the actual debt for the approved project, and then it goes away. So it helps in terms of the tax increase not going up as much, but it doesn't help in terms of providing funds within the operating budget. So in the next slide, you see the excluded debt service, again, major decrease as we're moving out of the last phases of the sewer project that were funded from the tax levy. So you can see, we've gone from $4.5 million back in 16 to just over $2 million, for the upcoming fiscal year. On the non-excluded debt, which is more constant, the next slide, you can see we're roughly around $7 million. It goes down by $275,000 in fiscal 23. Again, most of that is our annual capital budget, and then some of the non-excluded projects that I mentioned earlier, like the fire station and the DPW facility. Just taking a look at employees, again, the numbers, again, over time, we've been, as you can see on the left-hand column, the general government side, we've been at 250 now for, a solid 5 years. And that's really not changing. We're really, not looking to add employees and so forth. On the school side, which is the right-hand column, they've had increases. Some of them are driven by some of their structural changes where they brought in some of their special ed enrollment numbers, and others have been by additional staff. And it was noted by the question earlier tonight. And again, I don't have their 23 numbers broken out yet at this point in time. In terms of the budget drivers that sort of tie everything back together, for what I just walked through, we're roughly at $5.6 million. You look on the revenue side, the next slide, you can see that the available revenue sources are primarily from the property tax. The allowed increase under 2.5 of 2.75 million. We're projecting new growth at $1.5 million, which has been consistent for the last couple of years. And our excess levy capacity is 1.4 million, which was the $1 million we applied from the free cash, and we were 480,000 below levy limit. And you can see at the bottom line in the free cash that gets offset the $1 million, of free cash we're not baking into this budget. And then we've got state aid of just under $1 million increase and local receipts at 430,000. Now I'll just walk into these revenue analysis a little deeper. Again, I like to do much on the expense side. On the revenue side, I look at 5-year trends. You can see just by the right-hand columns, the percentage of the budget funded by the property tax continues to increase. It's roughly going to be 78% for fiscal 23, where you can see our state aid is declining, from over 13% down to 12.5%. And then local receipts are 7%, and available funds are 2.4%. So again, that's sort of where we're seeing. I mentioned earlier about the Chapter 70 funding. Again, over a 5-year period, the numbers aren't as dramatic, and they're obviously helped by this year's number. But even over a 5-year period, you're not at 2%. You're not even at an inflationary level, not even if you compound it. So we got roughly $1 million in Chapter 70 education funding over a 5-year period. And in general government aid, which used to be called lottery aid and additional assistance, that increase has been better. We're up by 658,000 or 13%. And just to take a pause here, you may have seen some stories in the last couple of weeks from the Mass Municipal Association and others pointing out sort of the inequity of what's happened here is Governor Baker and his administration for 8 years committed to tie the increase in general government aid to the increase in the state's overall budget. But then this year, he didn't really make the adjustment for the extraordinary windfall that the state had in the last year. And that's a bit of a sore point of contention. And the Municipal Association is going to help to push that into the legislature to say, hey, wait a minute, how do we have a partnership here when the state has a dramatic increase in its revenues, which were unforeseen during the pandemic, but yet the town is only getting the increase on your voted budgets adjusted, each December on a projected increase. So we'll see what happens there, but it's unforeseen at this point. Moving to the 10-year slide, you see the same message. You can see again the trend on from 13 to 23 over a 10-year period, the property tax going from 75% of the budget to 78%, the state aid going from 14% down to 12.5%, local receipts around the 7 level. And again, looking at the Chapter 70 money over a 10-year period, it's even more discouraging. You have 18.5% over a 10-year period, which we know isn't meeting the extraordinary cost to fund education in terms of what it's costing for salaries, in terms of special education costs, transportation, and so forth. So again, that burden's being shifted to the local level, to the property tax. And however, on the general government aid, again, the number is half as much versus Chapter 70 education aid. That story is a little better. It's 1.4 million, or a third increase. But again, the governor has chosen to increase the lower of the two categories. So again, moving on to looking at the 5-year detail for the upcoming year. As I mentioned earlier, the available new levy capacity is 4.25 million. That's basically you take in the excess levy capacity of another 1.5 million, and it brings you to 5.7 million. So that's what you look at in terms of what's available. Again, what actually will happen in fall when the free cash is certified, and if there's something that can be done at that time, we'll see. But at this point, this is what we have known. Moving to the next slide, you sort of see, well, where I always print this out is where does the tax single family bill go? And again, it shows what we talked in the budget. In terms of the school, the budget line item, which is 45% of that, is 3,500 of that 7,800. And you can see benefits insurance being the next largest one of over $1,450, or over 18.5%. And then you see the others as broken out. Moving into the property tax valuation, because this also affects single family bill and so forth. But clearly you're seeing the change in the trend towards increased residential valuation versus commercial valuation. And that's expected to increase in the year ahead, because that's what the 23 assessments are going to be on sales that were completed at the end of December, basically 6 weeks ago. And we all know what happened to the residential market last year. And then also multifamilies construction and so forth is captured under residential, even though the layman considers that to be commercial because they're apartments and so forth. So again, the valuation, is that way and likely to continue for the foreseeable future. Looking at average single family tax bill, again, how we measure ourselves compared to our peer communities. The column here is the one on the right, the state rank. 1 would be the highest. That would be, the town of Weston. And then 351 would be the lowest community. Probably somewhere up Western Mass. We maintain at mid 60s, low 70 level. This year it shot back up to 67. And one thing I will note, and again, it is consistent in terms of we keep the state ranking from the DOR website, but there are a number of communities that are above us that aren't included because they have special tax adjustments by acts of the legislature, such as Concord and Sudbury and a few other communities that have, local property tax assessments. So the state excludes them from their analysis. So if you were really to say what's Chelmsford compared to all the communities, we're probably in the mid 70s when you look at that data. But anyway, it gives you a sense of magnitude of that yes, taxes are going up in Chelmsford, but they're going up everywhere, just like home values. And again, the other one I presented back in December, which I needn't walk through again, but when you look over the last couple of years, you can see the increase in Chelmsford has been proportionate with our neighboring communities as well. State aid on page 59. Again, the numbers are known from the governor's cherry sheet. The 11.96 million in Chapter 70, and the 5.7 being the big ones in state aid. Again, an increase of 5.5%, or just under $1 million. Local receipts. The next slide, on slide 60. Again, that's 10.575, the right-hand column, and half of that is motor vehicle excise. Although you haven't received your motor vehicle excise bills from the town yet, they will be coming out within a couple of weeks, and that's the major commitment that comes in January. And I'll ask John to just touch upon that, because although we don't have the billing commitment, he does have the insight of where we are to date on that major commitment. So John, I'll turn it to you for a moment.
Thank you. The good news is when we received the commitment totals, we had been a little concerned because everybody's heard of the very low levels of inventory that everyone has. All the dealers have for used cars, also the shortages in new cars due to the chip issues and supply chain problems. So we're a little concerned that might dampen new car sales. But the good news is on this major commitment that we've received, and as the town manager said, bills will be going out in the next week or two. Really, the total level of commitments was up around 5% or so. So we're holding our own, and the good thing is that we're not seeing any major decreases. So that was a little, until we had received the actual numbers from the RMV, we're a little concerned that, and usually when the economy starts to soften a little, this is motor vehicle excise revenue is tied directly to newer car sales, because we know from prior years that the town receives the most the higher level of tax revenue on newer vehicles, and it depreciates very quickly over 5 years. So we're very pleased with that. See that looks like we're going to be holding up very well on motor vehicle for the remainder of this fiscal year. And we'll see where it goes from there.
And the thing to note, because we all know about dealers getting car sales over a sticker price, that's not how the state determines your excise tax. The state excise taxes depend on manufacturer suggested retail price. So it's not tied to what somebody pays for a car. So even though we know dealers are selling above sticker price, that's not affecting our motor vehicle excise levy capacity. Now, we're interested to see what may happen in the year ahead. If manufacturers do adjust their manufactured sticker price, then obviously that would be a means of shoring up this category in the years ahead. But I just wanted to point that out because I think people are looking at it saying, well, wait a minute, used cars and new cars are selling above sticker price. Well, it has nothing to do with what you pay. It's based on MSRP. So anyway, that's the big, again, that's more than half, that's roughly half of our local receipts is motor vehicle. We are still seeing strong results in our quarterly distributions of our meals tax and lodging tax, which is sort of, another significant component of local receipts. And so far, permit activity is holding strong as well. Moving on to additional funds. Again, as I said, this is a miscellaneous category. You can see the right-hand column. The changes aren't significant. Those are just the benefit costs that come into the budget from the enterprise operations, in terms of the sewer enterprise, child care, revolving fund, and stormwater enterprise, and so forth. So, again, not a lot of impact there. Again, inflation, I'm not going to dwell upon it. I haven't seen the January number for Boston, but we know it's around 6 to 7%. So again, that's something that is in the back of our minds going forward is at what point is this really going to create budgetary crimps as we go into fiscal 23 and beyond, because as we all know, Proposition 2.5 doesn't make allowances for inflation. It's 2.5% regardless of what happens in the cost of living. So to sort of wrap up again on slide 63, that we're seeing the structural reliance that I mentioned in my discussion earlier on property tax, because the state's Chapter 70 contribution isn't keeping pace with inflation. Again, the governor's final budget didn't change that at all, and that's really what's going to guide us for 23. And then the other big disappointment recently was the issue of Chapter 90 roadway construction. The governor once again, level funded Chapter 90 roadway monies, which is basically from your gas tax and what they provide to cities and towns at $200 million on the state level. As I mentioned earlier, and is written here, it hasn't increased in a decade. So the purchasing power of that is actually diminished by about 40%. And it really is only about a third of what's really needed to maintain our roadway infrastructure. So that's disappointing. And in fact, at the select board meeting on the 28th of this month, we're going to be doing a presentation in terms of our roadway pavement assessment, as well as our roadway and sidewalk construction plan and the resources we have to deal with that. So again, that's a constraint in the budget. And then OPEB's not even being talked about, sadly. This administration did nothing with it for 8 years. And it's just sort of an ongoing constraint that's going to impact communities down the road because of the 10-year rule. I mean, and it really matters. And it also matters now because you're seeing employees moving in and out of the public sector. And much like private sector, I've noticed in the last 6 to 9 months, we're seeing employee fluidity, meaning, attrition and inflow, just like the private sector. And why that matters in the issue of OPEB and in benefits, we had an employee last month who basically hit their 10-year anniversary and immediately gave their 2 weeks notice. And again, we also had an employee last week who basically we hired, and then 2 weeks later provided us with notice saying that a previous employer had contacted that person, and they were going to then get what amounted to a $16,000 per year increase in compensation. So obviously that person gave their notice before they almost put their coat down. And so again, why this matters for the benefit thing is the one thing that it impacts is if you got people who are exiting or coming in for the 10-year benefit of health insurance, it does create a liability going forward. So with that as a closing comment on the operating budget, I'm going to turn the presentation over to John Souza, who's the chair of the town's capital plan committee, and he will walk us through the capital budget.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Finance Committee. So back in the second slide here shows a breakout of the recommended FY23 capital plan by functional area, and this may look familiar to many of the members. We looked at this back at the December tri-board meeting, and tonight we're going to take a more in-depth look at the recommended capital plan. So on this slide, you can see that the most significant areas of investment are in school buildings, public works, and public safety. The total recommended capital plan is just over $3.77 million. We have a smaller amount of bond premiums that we're required to reserve from our last sale, and those will be used to just slightly defray when we do our next bond issuance. So the amount that we would be seeking to borrow would be just over $3.75 million. And so next we'll take a look on the next slide, these areas. So the first one is municipal technology, and the first project is a complete replacement of our network switches at a cost of $130,000. The reason for that is the ones that we are currently using are approaching their end of life, and at a certain point will no longer be supported, so those need to be upgraded. The next project is a door security upgrade at a cost of $100,000. This is an ongoing project. This is the next phase. You can see that we'll be looking to bring some of the fire stations, our libraries, and senior center as we continue to transition away from the traditional metal door locks that require a key to an electronic system. Then moving on to under municipal administration, and this is continuation. This is, I believe, the fourth phase of some vault and archive storage upgrades that our town clerk has been working on here at the town offices to try to modernize some of these areas and make the records more accessible. This is a cost of $53,000. One of the main priorities here is to digitize a lot of the planning and zoning files that are down in a storage room here at town offices. The reason for that is, as you can imagine, every time a new development is submitted to the planning board, they receive large boxes of plans. And so you can imagine with limited space that it'll be much more efficient and take up much space if those were digitized. And we'll also be adding some shelving, better shelving on a couple of vaults. If we go on to the next slide, this affects both the Adams and McKay libraries. So this project involves masonry repair at both of those buildings, and the cost is $60,000. That photo shows actually one of the chimneys, I believe, at the Adams library location. And moving on to public safety, the fire department has two projects for this year's plan. The first is the replacement of an older SUV type vehicle at a cost just under $58,000. You can see it replaces an older 2008 Explorer type vehicle. And then the next one is the more significant investment. We'll be seeking to replace engine 3 at a cost of just over $785,000. You can see that that's a 2008 vehicle as well. And I believe in the past we've heard the presentations from Chief Ryan regarding some of the maintenance issues on some of these older vehicles. So those are two for the fire department. And then we move on to Public Works. Under this area, we have $350,000 included for sidewalk construction, as well as $400,000 for road improvements. And for the sidewalks, at the time this was presented, the areas that were discussed were Old Westford Road and Fletcher Street, and the roads had included Manning Road, Biltmore Ave, Cliff Road, and Rack Road, as well as other improvements that are done throughout the town. Also under Public Works is a sander truck replacement. This replaces an older 2005 sander truck at a cost of $165,000. The next slide shows the replacement of a older pickup truck vehicle at a cost of $55,000 for the Municipal Facilities Department. You can see that truck has definitely seen better days with the year and mileage on that. Then we move on to the area of school facilities. And the first project is the cost is just over $156,000. This involves a few things. This has been deferred for the past 2 to 3 years. This was the highest priority of the school administration, the school committee. This involves the cleaning, repair, and servicing of existing ductwork and air handling devices throughout a number of the schools. And it also includes the replacement of hot water convector units at the Wesleyan School building. If we go on to the next slide, this has been a safety concern. There's a number of stairwells and stair tread upgrades planned for the Byam, Harrington, and Parker schools. And that cost is just over $135,000. Basically, as you see in the picture, the work will involve installing non-slip rubber stair treads on all of the concrete stairs, and also repairing concrete stairwells. So if there's a chip or something that needs to be filled for safety, that work will be done as well. The next slide involves the renovation of all the restrooms at the Wesleyan School. That costs just over $455,000. And this, for many of you, you've seen that this is an ongoing effort for school facility improvements to systematically go through the school buildings and try to upgrade the restrooms so that you have all ADA compliant fixtures and newer upgrade some of the newer fixtures. The next slide involves some safety repairs and upgrades on the gymnasium walls at 2 elementary schools, which are the South Row School and the Center School. So basically here what they'll be doing is doing some repairs to the gym walls, some of the floors, and they'll all be installing protective pads along some of the wall area in those gyms, just so if students accidentally playing sport or whatever and they accidentally hit the wall, it reduced the possibility of injury. The next slide shows the kitchen upgrade at the McCarthy Middle School. That cost is just over $438,000. Again, this is one of these multi-year projects you've seen in prior years. The school department is working to upgrade all of the school kitchens and food prep areas, and so McCarthy is next on the list. And you can see it involves new equipment, some non-slip flooring, as well as new student serving lines. And this is part of their long-range plan, sorely needed. And then finally, the last project is a boiler replacement at our high school at a cost of $325,000. As our facilities director explained, these boilers have reached the end of their life, and it's much more cost effective to replace these rather than keep trying to do short-term repairs. So look at all the projects, and then the next slide just shows our next step would be seeking town meeting approval in April, and then after receiving that, we would then move on to actually issue municipal bonds to finance these projects in around the late June, early July timeframe. And then the last slide is just a summary of all the projects that usually appears in the Finance Committee booklet for town meeting and the town manager's budget book. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer those on the capital plan.
John, just one on the town clerk item. I know we've had several years now where we've done various, whether it's vault or storage work on the town clerk records. Have we looked at like just a more broad effort to digitize essentially everything? Obviously, that would be a big deal, but like instead of, I think that's probably where we'll get to eventually. But like, if we just tried to digitize and get rid of all the files to the extent that we could, have we looked into the cost of that?
Yeah, it's a little difficult to answer, Art, because one of the things I've been involved with the town clerk on a committee on this, and some of the records that we keep are relatively short term. So, for example, for accounting, my office, some of the records have to be kept in perpetuity, but others may be kept for 3 years, 5 years, some cases maybe only 2 years. And so those, they sort of cycle in and cycle out. I know they had worked to restore the oldest, like the old volumes, the books that she showed, the historical books and records of the town that go back well over 250 years or so. Those are being conserved so that we have the original book, but I believe they were also making digital images of those so that they can be preserved, because eventually we know long after we're all no longer on the earth, many of those books really would be, even if they're conserved, they would be, if you're talking another 100 or 200 years from now, they may be in very rough shape or almost impossible to read. So they are digitizing what they can, to answer your question. And some of this has just been, when Tricia looked at this, a lot of these rooms, I will say, had been it hadn't been a priority. We're focusing on other things over the years. And some of these rooms were really in rough shape. The shelving was old and antiquated. So it's been like a multi-year effort to try to go through some of these rooms first, make them so that you can make them easily accessible with better shelving, and then, categorize the records. We've been purging records that are not required to be kept. Some of the stuff in there had been a buildup over the years. Other things that you see here, this photo that you see here on the slide is actually of a room in the basement of Town Hall, and there are a number of books that you can see on the shelves. Those are actually, I believe, tax record books that would belong to my department. And so those are bound volumes. Some things are easy to digitize than others, I guess, the way I would answer it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'd like to thank the town manager and the finance director for presenting this evening. Going right along in our agenda, we have a reorganization discussion and vote. So this time, every year, we changed this process about 4 or 5 years ago, so it coincided with the start of the budget season. We have a discussion of a reorganization, a vote for chair and for vice chair, going forward for the next year, calendar year. So with that said, I will leave the floor open for nominations for chair.
I will nominate Jim Clancy to be chair for the ensuing term.
I'll second that.
I second. Oh,
Do you have any other nominations? Hearing none.
I move that the nominations be closed.
Second.
second.
Do you have a vote?
I vote for Jim.
Yes.
I will vote for Jim Clancy.
I will abstain. Next, we have a vote for our nominations for vice chair.
I will nominate Anita Tanini for vice chair.
I second.
Any other nominations?
Move to close the nominations.
Second.
All right. Do a vote?
Yes.
Aye.
Anita? Vote for Anita.
I abstain.
All right. Boy, it's not like Groundhog Day. We're not quite on February 2nd, but we're close enough.
We never even asked you if you wanted the job, Jim.
No, you didn't. You closed the vote and went. Aim for Anita.
By the way, I did threaten Kathy that we would vote her for chair since she wasn't here.
And
Ah,
you could have nominated her
I
too.
told her I told her, like, just to, incentivize her to come to the meeting, to really try to get out of her other meetings.
tough crowd.
So, moving along in the agenda, we have a discussion of the liaison assignments for fiscal year 2023 budget review. So let me just pull up that document. And I've emailed a draft copy to each of you earlier this evening. Pull it up just for review purposes. Go. Screen. Make sure I'm choosing the right one. Okay, so what I have not done here, just for illustration purposes, so that we can discuss it, is I have not removed Vicky or Amina. I've left them in to show where they were last year and what they worked on for reviews. But Sam and John and everyone else here, please feel free to jump in and to say who'd like to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down through departments from the top, plain and simple. Someone wants to be on it, let me know, and we'll make that adjustment, and then we can start from here, scheduling our telephone conference meetings, Zoom meetings, what have you, to review the various parts of the review with departments the various parts of the budget. So, Board of Health, Anita, I have you there. You want to continue on there?
Yeah, you can continue me with everything that I had. I'm fine with that, unless someone else really wants to jump in.
It doesn't have to be just one person either. If someone wants to join as well, that's perfectly acceptable too. Okay. Capital planning, David, thank you for serving that role this year and being on the committee. Certainly helpful, beneficial. I know Kathy's done it in the past, Amina's done it in the past. Thank you for jumping in and doing that this year.
And I don't mind continuing.
Well, it's done. So you're
That's right, too.
Cemetery. Dave, you want to continue with that?
Oh, I think I qualify, yes. Yes.
Well, if that's
I'd be
the
more-
criteria, I should probably join him.
No, I'll take this one for you, Sam.
All right, Chelmsford Public Schools. We've had Kathy and Dave. You've been on that as well. Vicki was on that with that group as well.
Kathy wanted to stay on the school, she said,
Okay.
if she could.
Yeah, I'd like to stay on, but the problem I have is I'm in Florida for the next 3 weeks. And I just don't, usually it works out, but I don't know for sure.
We can certainly have you there, and if someone else wants to jump on, or
That's what I'm suggesting, that somebody, leave me on, but it would be helpful for Kathy, probably have somebody else in here as well.
Jim, I'll volunteer for that one.
Okay, perfect. All right. Community Preservation Fund, I don't know if Kathy mentioned anything about that to you, Anita. She's been with the CPC.
She only mentioned the schools that she would really like to, I asked her, is there anything you really want to stay on?
Okay.
And she said she would really like to stay on the schools,
Okay.
but she's fine with anything.
Gotcha.
So she's okay with anything else.
No one wants to join that. And again, we can adjust these at future meetings too. So if there's something else piques your interest, someone else wants to jump on, we can certainly do that as well. Senior Center, Dave, you've done that in the past.
Yeah, more than glad to continue.
And then for DPW Waste and Sewer and Storm, I know, Eric, you and I have done that the past couple of years now.
Happy to continue. It's fine with me, either way.
Okay, we'll keep it there for now, and if we need to adjust, we will. Finance Department and Accounting, and I'll just go down the list here. Assessors, Information Technology, Treasury and Collection. Anita, you've done that.
Yeah, usually they're quick, and and John has all of them, so they're kind of done together. But if someone wants to come in with me,
You usually do that in person, Anita, or you do it by telephone or Zoom or?
I haven't done it in person the last couple of years because of COVID, but I can certainly do it in person. But I can do it either way. It's either way. I'm fine either way.
I know, John, if you want to do that or if something else piquing your interest. John? You're still muted. Sorry.
John Tebow.
Jim, which John are you talking about?
I'm sorry, I'm talking about you, John.
I'd be happy to help out.
Okay, well, we'll put you on there. I'll just add you. Okay, Fire Department, that had been you and Amina, Eric.
Yep, I'm happy to stay on. If somebody else wants to join, or one man show, either way.
Either's fine. With the library, Kathy's there. I'll leave her there for now, but someone wants to jump in, or if Kathy would like to step down, change from that one, we'd certainly do that too. Neshoba Valley, we really should have about 3 people there. We have Eric and David. Would someone like to join them?
I'll volunteer for that one too.
Okay, Sam, thank you.
Now on that one, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, they're giving their annual, they usually have a breakfast, and she presents her budget. If anybody, wants to, Sam, if you want to, I can send you the link if you want to.
Okay, is that being done virtually? Is that being done virtually, Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, if you could send me the link, that would be good. I'll jump in on that.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll send you the link.
Thank you.
I think Paul sent us the link too in an email.
I think he did. Now, yeah.
All right, PEG Access with Pete. That had been Vicky, so we do need someone to jump in and take that one.
PEG access, that's a cable, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Educational and government.
Well, I'm already at the CTM, so I might as well do that one too.
Need to have you in red there. All right, Police Department had been myself and Amina. I don't know if someone wants to jump on with me on that one. Or as one man, I can do it myself as well, that's fine.
I'm happy to join if you'd like, Jim. Or if you want to go solo, either way. Doesn't
No, I
matter.
don't care. So that's more than acceptable. So I'll add you there. And then public facilities is done at the same time as the DPW, so it makes sense for us to stay on there for now. All right. We've all just had the presentation from a town manager on the general budget. And then for veteran services, do you usually do it at the same time as the other ones, Anita? Is that separate?
I don't. That's separate.
Would you like to continue doing those?
I would, because it's the only time I get to catch up with Regina.
Fair enough. Okay. All right.
But
So,
anybody's welcome to join me if they want.
I'm sorry, John. Susan?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask if we could make one change on the contact list up under cemetery. If we could just lift David Boyle, just where he's the superintendent. I am a cemetery commissioner, but I just didn't want David to feel
Oh no, of course,
excluded. No, thank you very much. That's great.
not a problem. Okay. So this will be our working document. I'll send this around to everybody with the updated. Everyone wants to change, wants to make a different appointment. That's great. Let me know. We'll also, as we go through with the warrants, certainly add into this list for the warrant articles for the Springtown meeting. Anything additional, although most of them are budget oriented. There are, I believe, a couple that are not, including there's a citizen petition. Is that making it to Springtown meeting, Paul?
Yes, it has to. It's on there. As I said, we've got roughly about 35 articles at this point, but as you just summarized, they're mostly financial. There's at this point in time, there's no bylaw changes or zoning bylaw proposals. So it's a pretty straightforward warrant, which will be a lot of consent agenda, and then the typical CPC and other revolving fund articles that we do at town meeting.
Perfect. Okay. So as far as schedule is concerned, now that we have the liaison assignments, we'll go right ahead to discuss budget hearing and Springtown meeting warrant article schedule. Our next available date is next Thursday. And of course, the following week is the special town meeting, so we will not have a meeting that week, although we typically don't have a meeting that week anyway because it's school vacation week. But if people can meet between now, and I know it's a crunch, I would need to know by Tuesday to post the agenda whether or not we have anyone that will be meeting with them between now and midday Thursday next week, so that we can have them come in and present next Thursday. If not, we won't have a meeting next week. So if you guys can let me know by midday next Tuesday whether or not anyone is available to come in next Thursday to present. If not, again, we'll start scheduling not the following week because of special town meeting, but the week after.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have to get the cemetery done and the senior center done before next Thursday, because I'm going to Florida. So it's really up to you guys whether you want to meet for just those two or you want to defer them until later. It's your call. I will have them ready.
Okay. Well, and other people might meet between now and then as well, okay. David. So, again, just by next Tuesday, people can let me know. And based upon who's available, who's coming in, we'll decide whether or not we proceed with the meeting next Thursday. But the next available meeting date after that would be in March, which we try to avoid the first Thursday in the month because we conflict with the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that makes it a little bit more difficult for Telemedia. Although trying to get this budget reviewed, there are 5 Thursdays in March. So I think we'll be okay even if we had to defer from that first Thursday. But we'll cross that bridge if, as, and when we come to it. Just so it's on your radar, as far as scheduling is concerned. Any questions? All right, seeing none, I'll have public comment. There's no one in the chat room. No one's putting their hand up. I'm not seeing any press, so there are no press questions. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.